Hello, everybody. Welcome back to today's People Power webcast. I hope you've enjoyed these sessions so far. If you've been able to participate in those, we've had 3 sessions today, and this is our 4th. Throughout the day, we're running a total of 8 30-minute bite-sized learning sessions from experts in their fields to help organizations with the challenges that everyone faces as we recover and try and grow our organizations into the future, responding, of course, to the coronavirus crisis. One core theme exists across all of the sessions being delivered today. That's the well-being, development, and performance of our people. We're using the hashtag #PeoplePoweredBusiness, as I'm sure you're all aware, having followed the previous sessions. My name is Andrew Wilson. I work for the Project Studio. It's a pleasure to welcome you all back and welcome you anew if you're joining this first session today. Just a quick word of thanks to our sponsors, very briefly: Northumbria University, Westray Recruitment, our headline sponsor, Hive HR, our gold sponsor for People Power, NESMA, a theme sponsor for the marketing and communications theme within People Power, and an associate sponsor, Engage Northeast. More about Engage Northeast in a very short while, but before I introduce them and our speaker for this session, just a few words around the technical aspects of Zoom, particularly with regards to Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question to Nita Clarke, who will be presenting this session on employee engagement, and please just pop that into the Q&A box within Zoom, and we'll have a look through those and try and ask questions at the end of Nita's presentation. So any other technical issue as well, just use the Q&A box rather than the chat box, if that's okay for today. Slides and speaker details will be shared following the session. And I've been mentioning throughout the day, so I'll give it another quick mention, if you don't mind, that People Power is CPD accredited. So we'll be sending out certificates of participation, which contribute to points against personal development and training records. So all participants will get a CPD certificate following their viewing and participation in the webinars. Very quickly, feedback. Help us to help you by ensuring that we develop People Power into the future by giving us some feedback, both positive and negative, if there's any suggestions on how we can improve not just the webcast, but the whole brand and the whole aspect around People Power, the conferences that we run, and we'd be very glad to hear it, and we'll do our best to act on that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand across now to Michelle Manning. Michelle works for 3P, Peak Performance Partnership. And Peak Performance Partnership are a regional ambassador for the Engage for Success initiative and campaign, which is a UK-wide campaign. So Peak Performance Partnership run Engage Northeast, which is obviously the regional part of that network. And Michelle, welcome to today's session.
Hi Andrew, thanks very much. Good afternoon everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. As Andrew mentioned, my name is Michelle Manning. I work for 3P, and as Regional Ambassador for Engage for Success, I co-run the Engage Northeast network with my colleague Trevor Norman of 3P, with support from PeopleGauge and Maggie Pavlou as well. And Engage Northeast is the national arm, is the Northeast arm of the national movement Engage for Success. We set the regional network up in 2016 in order to bring the Engage for Success message to the Northeast. And the network's really about sharing best practice, sharing knowledge and skills and experience in order to help each other to build engaged and productive workforces. And we really want to help foster cross-sector collaboration as well across the Northeast. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Nita Clarke to you all. And Nita is the co-founder of Engage for Success, and she'll be speaking on our behalf. So thanks, and hi Nita.
Hi, hello everyone. Lovely to be with you. I'm just checking how close am I. I don't want to alarm everybody and send you all off. I should also say
you're good.
The heavens have just opened here, so there's like a monsoon going on outside. But it's great to be here and to support the work of Engage for Success. I do a lot of meetings around the country. Normally, you know, you can see people face to face, obviously, but I'm delighted that you've all decided to go ahead with this today, so I can share some thoughts around engagement in the pandemic. So let's start. Right, hang on a minute. Let's just get this share screen. There we go. Okay, let's hope that is. I've selected it, and I'm going to go share. Okay, right. So, can you see the screen okay? I'm assuming that everybody can. All right, hold on a minute. Let's just So, it's lovely, as I say, to be here with everybody. Excuse me, I'm very old. You'll have to just bear this in mind. So, if technically it doesn't go quite as smoothly as with the youngsters. And I hope I'm not too close to the screen. This always reminds me of that scene in Tootsie when Dustin Hoffman's being filmed as a woman for the first time, and the director says, "Can you pull a bit further back to make her look a bit more attractive?" And this is happening in New York, and the cameraman says, "How do you feel about Cleveland?" So if I'm Clevelanding you, do forgive me. Some of you may know a bit about Engage for Success. Let me just say a little bit about the background. So as you know, my name's Nita Clarke. I'm a former trade union official with Unison. I spent 8 years at Number 10 as Tony Blair's advisor on trade unions and employment issues. And when I left in 2008, when Tony left, I got a job. I was very lucky as director of this not-for-profit charity called the Involvement and Participation Association, which has always believed that sanity is possible in employment relations, despite all the evidence to the contrary. So when I got this job, I started reading the stuff that was around employee engagement. So we're talking, God, 12 years ago now. And I thought there were some incredibly interesting insights around how people behave at work and how you could motivate people to behave at work. So I went to the then Secretary of State, Peter Mandelson, and I said, look, I think, you know, as a government, we should be aware of some of these insights. Firstly, because the government's a huge employer, you know, within the public sector, and therefore, you know, we want to do the right thing by employees. But secondly, is it possible that the low levels of engagement in the UK are contributing to the productivity deficit in the UK? In other words, is there a connection between the two? So what then happened was that he asked me to work with a wonderful guy called David McLeod to have a look at this issue, which is what I did with David. And we did this report called Engaging for Success. We spent almost a year going around the country, talking to people about their experiences. The report is still available, even though it's quite old, and it has survived several changes of government and is still, I think, you know, certainly within government considered to be reasonably influential. So what we did was, as I say, we did a lot of work looking at case studies, talking to people about their experiences, what engagement looked like, and within the report, you know, we pointed out that there were about 1,000 definitions of employee engagement, and I would have to be honest to you and say that sometimes my elevator pitch is not as good as some others. I was very lucky. David and we both were given the OBE for this work, and when I went to the palace to receive my medal from the Queen, it was all fine, and you know, I managed not to fall over and all the rest of it. And just as I got to the point where I shook the Queen's hand and she pinned the medal on me, she said to me, "Well, tell me, what is employee engagement?" And I thought, oh God, how long have you got? So I started to kind of witter about it, getting the best out of people and making sure that people were happy and fulfilled. And unsurprisingly, Her Majesty's eyes glazed over, and her flunkies had to take me away because I was still wittering. What I've done here on this slide is given you two definitions of engagement that we thought about in the report. The first is one from Professor David Guest, which I think is very good because it makes it clear that employee engagement is something organizations can do something about. All right, and I think that is important. It's not a sort of theoretical construct. It's something that organizations can affect and effect. But if I'm honest with you, I guess my definition is the second one, I don't know if you remember when Bill Clinton, I mean, I told you I was very old, we're going back a long way here, but when Bill Clinton was running for president, his staff, in an effort to sort of get him to concentrate on stuff preferably above the waist, put up on the wall, you know, it's the economy, stupid. In other words, to focus on the thing that matters. Well, in my view, I mean, in a sense, employee engagement comes down to this. It's the people, stupid. Because in any organization, the truth is, however good your capital equipment is, your IT systems, your investment in machinery, if the people who work in the organization either aren't motivated enough to do the work you want them to do, or indeed are not able to do the work that you want them to do because the configuration, the way the organization works actually stops them from doing the job. I mean, to be honest with you, so many people said when we were going around the country, said to us, look, I love my job, but it's as if they, i.e. the organization, does everything they can to put obstacles in my way. I mean, if that's the situation in the organization, then, you know, you are just chucking money away. And in any organization, if I went to the chief finance officer and said, look, it's okay if your computers only work a third of their capacity, they'd think I was completely mad. All right, well, then how come it's okay in the UK that still only about a third of the workforce are actively engaged? I mean, just think of the waste of performance and productivity, the kind of impact is, if you like, on the return on investment in the staff, but think about the waste of the people. Now, these are people with much more to give who are frustrated and stymied at work. It affects their well-being, and it's just an incredible waste of human potential. So we, David and I, as I said, we went around the country and we talked to a large number of people. And, you know, some of the evidence, I'm not going to bang through all of this because it's all pretty clear. And hopefully that, oh, I think that was, okay, there we go. Oh, hang on, I'm going to go back a slide. Sorry. Hang on a minute. Oh, yeah. So, you know, we know the linkages with employee engagement. There's plenty of, there was evidence that we had in our report, and it's even been updated subsequently by lots of other, you know, surveys and academic work that's been done. And one of the things that on this slide, I mean, the thing that is particularly nowadays, I think is incredibly important, is that innovation links to engagement. And as I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute, but as we come out of the pandemic, you know, when you are going to expect people who are still in the organization to innovate, they will not do that. People don't innovate at the point of a gun. You know, they innovate when they feel confident and committed and collaborative. And as we know, in particular, the relationship with well-being is extremely strong between, interestingly, Dame Carol Black, you know, who's the expert on health at work, said to us, you know, that when, from her point of view, the most important thing she would do if she could wave a magic wand to improve the health of the nation at work, she said, it wouldn't be musculoskeletal and so on issues. It would be to improve the relationship between individuals and their line managers, because that was the biggest single cause of workplace ill health. So, you know, there are these links, as I say, look at the report, look at all the other evidence, particularly on the Engage for Success website. But, you know, as we were going around the country, and even more in all the work we've been doing since, because we're still working on this, the problem is, you know, Houston, we have a problem. And that is that we are basically still trying to manage people in a 21st century workforce in a 20th century way. I mean, the default position in so many organizations still is that people are basically units of production. They can be moved around the board, like, you know, if you're playing that game Risk where you move your armies around. So you've got a very strong sense of command and control. And with command and control, of course, you have to have bureaucracy. And if you've got bureaucracy, of course, you've got to have hierarchy. And what does that do? It creates what I call risk-averse monoliths. So these huge organizations that find change and adaptability incredibly difficult. And if you think of the names that we have, the great names we have lost in the past 20 or so years, the dinosaurs who have not managed to adapt to the 21st century. Because when you think about it, what do we need from a workforce? And, you know, this, as I say, is pre-pandemic. We need people to be resilient, adaptable, confident, collaborative, innovative. Now, the problem is that a basically old-fashioned command and control management does not give you that. And therefore, there's this sort of chasm, in a way, still between the default setting. I mean, look, some peaks have more lipstick on them, of course. Some organizations do definitely try. But often the default setting, or they revert when trouble happens, they revert back to, you know, basically command and control. And of course, I mean, it works up to a point, you know, but that point is kind of very low down the scale of where you want it to be. And of course, there may be circumstances, I'm not daft here, occasionally, when, you know, you really have to, you know, just command and control for a short period of time. But if that's your default setting, then, you know, I think that the challenge is that the workforce just will not respond. Because if you think about it, there's a whole set of pressures on workplaces from outside, you know, that they are dealing with, that maybe we weren't 20 years ago. I mean, you've got customers and citizens being far more demanding. You've got all the cost pressures, technological changes. I mean, who can foretell what is coming down? And now the new technology is, of course, in areas, it's not just revolutionizing production on the shop floor. You know, it's affecting white collar and other professions. And the whole world, as I say, this is all pre-pandemic, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And of course, the problem is now that all of this trying to deal with these changes are taking place in a very transparent world. How organizations deal with all of this, you know, it's not down to a small group of people at the top who can take the decisions, and it's all sort of secret squirrel, because within about 5 seconds, these decisions go around the world on social media. And so organizations are trying to cope with all of these pressures, and a lot of them are, you know, finding it extremely challenging. And as if this wasn't bad enough, here are some of the signs of the times: consumer ethics, the march of the robots. You know, all of these pressures are really squeezing down on organizations. So, okay, we've got that, but we've also then got the pressures from people at work. Because, look, some people say that this stuff is, you know, just the younger generation. I mean, I don't believe that myself. I think that these aspirations, some of which I've identified here, I think people even of my age had them. The difference is that we were probably not, we didn't feel empowered enough or strong enough to make these demands. I mean, when I was starting off in my career and I was working for a trade union, when the general secretary said to me, jump, what did I say? I said, how high? Now, you say that to my kids, and I'm sure, you know, those of you who've got kids now at work, or even the younger members of the, you know, of the audience, you say that, you know, jump now, and what's the response going to be? It's not going to be how high, it's going to be why. I mean, tell me why I should jump. It's not, I'm not a terrorist, it's not that I'm not going to jump, but you've got to give me a good reason for doing it. And that is a huge challenge again for you know, organizations relying on JFDI, right? Because there's you know, it just doesn't work. Here are some of the things that we identified as the pressures coming from people at work, and this agenda around fairness and trust and wanting to work for an organization, you know, that takes you into its confidence, that treats you like a real human being. I mean, you treat me like a human resource number 2763, and that's how I behave. But you treat me as a whole human being, then, you know, you will get far more out of me. But people also want meaning and purpose, and increasingly, in my view, as we've seen from lots of reports, they want to be in an organization that's driven by values and ethics. People want to be empowered, they want to have some sense of autonomy, and of course we've got a very different workforce, which is much more diverse, thank goodness. And there are, of course, great issues around diversity and inclusion, which we don't really have time to deal with today, but are incredibly important. But it's also a decreasingly differential workforce. When David and I were doing this work, and this is really what I want to kind of try and focus on a bit today, we found 4 things that organizations who took engagement seriously, who wanted to engage in engagement, sort of looked at. This is not a template, it's not a model, but these are what we called enablers of engagement. you know, people have found them useful as lenses to look at their own practice and as things to think about as they develop their engagement agendas. The first is the story. What's the story of the organization, the strategic narrative? Because this, of course, gives a line of sight between what I do on a daily basis and the purpose of and vision of the organization. And here comms, let me just say, engagement doesn't belong to comms or HR or OD, it belongs to the whole organization. But the communication of the narrative is critical. And when you think about in the pandemic just how important communication has been, particularly when workplaces have been displaced and you're trying to deal with you know, teams who maybe, you know, who are working remotely, who are working different hours and so on. This sense of having the story, I just think has been incredibly important in the past months. So as a leader, modeling the values and behaviors you expect is of critical importance. The developing the story of the organization's response to the pandemic. You know, nobody is going to expect plain sailing here, but what's the story about how you as a leadership team or how you as an organization are reacting? And remember, you know, there's nothing worse than silence under normal circumstances, but that's even worse when you're dealing, frankly, with organizational success in the pandemic, because of course nature abhors a vacuum. You know, and just because you aren't communicating, it doesn't mean that other people are within the organization. And, you know, this sense of communicating, even when almost you've got nothing to say, even when events haven't moved on, but this constant sense of communication, of having the story, it just seems to me to be even more important than it was before. The next, of course, is the sense of managers who can deal with people as people and not as widgets or just as human resources. Here are some of the things that we think managers, you know, that it's very important for managers to be able to do. And, you know, I often feel for middle managers. I mean, somebody once described them as the sort of damp-proof course. But the problem is they are the meat in the sandwich. And if you have not supported your managers in developing people skills, you know, because we quite often make people managers because they were quite good at the job they last did, and that doesn't really tell you a great deal about how they're going to be able to manage people. And of course, this is now unbelievably important in the pandemic, because, you know, making sure that people in the team understand their role, making sure that individual managers are able to empathize, support, and encourage individuals, but also providing clarity what's needed and expected, and being clear about uncertainty. And you know, again, this is a big challenge, but thank goodness there are the social communication tools to be able to do this. Imagine if we were trying to cope with this in the era before, you know, widespread internet or social media. It would be incredibly difficult. But of course, now the necessity of treating people as individuals with different needs and making sure that the quiet ones contribute and so on. This being able to manage and bring people forward it just seems to me to a hugely important thing, this sense of engaging managers who can engage. Employee voice is the third thing that we identified as being incredibly important. So communication matters, of course it does, but listening. Are you listening to the organization? And particularly at this time, because, you know, there are necessarily no right or wrong answers. We don't know how to come out of the pandemic. Lots of organizations are really searching for the way forward. Well, you know, frankly, asking the staff for their views on how to respond seems to me a sort of straightforwardly sensible thing to do. I mean, if you want to know how to do a job better or differently, ask the person who's doing it. And you know, listening to staff and enabling them to express their hopes and fears, and enabling and you responding and feeding back to them about what you've heard, that virtuous loop, I think is incredibly important. And having architecture to listen, I mean, there's all sorts of ways now of listening, but making sure, of course, if you've got relations with trade unions or you've got a staff council, that you're using those, you know, to listen collectively. But this sense of people having a voice during the pandemic at work just seems to me to be even more important than perhaps it was before. And the fourth thing, and obviously, you know, we can come back to all of these in the questions, but the fourth thing that we identified that organizations who think about engagement know that they need to think about, as it were, is this sense of integrity. So in other words, the values on the wall are reflected in day-to-day behaviors. I mean, every organization's got values on the wall. I mean, one of the the best values set on a mouse mat that I ever read, was from an organization called Enron. I mean, we can have, I mean, they're not often worth the paper they're written on. So the thing is, what are the day-to-day behaviors? What's the culture, the behavioral culture that fulfills those values? Because the problem is, if there's a gap between the two, what does that create? It creates mistrust. Because then you can't trust an organization if they're saying one thing but behaving in a different way. And actually, underlying all of the stuff we're talking about today, in my view, is trust. Trust is the essence, all right, of engagement. So again, in the situation we find ourselves in now, what are some of the things to think about? Well, be hopeful about the future, but don't overpromise or make promises that you can't keep, because people aren't daft. And I think being open and honest about the challenges, because people work things out for themselves, is just is incredibly important. And as in a time of difficulty, reiterating publicly the values of the organization that will help us get through, but also reminding people of the behaviors, right, that make those values live, I think is a sort of really important part of how we get through. And it's this demonstration of that we really are all in it together. I mean, if we are all in it together in an organization, then what does that look like? I mean, those crazy organizations that are still awarding ludicrous bonuses to senior staff. I mean, I'm not making a sort of political point here, but at the same time as people are being furloughed, I mean, really, we're all in it together? I don't think so. And it's now going to start getting more difficult, isn't it? Because some of the fault lines are inevitable. Some staff on furlough. Are there going to be redundancies? We've sort of got through the first bit, and now the proverbial is about to hit the fan, isn't it? Some of the things to think about: don't make hasty or irreversible decisions without thinking them through and consulting with colleagues. Hold the difficult conversations and keep staff fully informed. Now, anybody who says to me that, forget engagement, we just got to make redundancies, that's crazy. Because I can show you plenty of examples where organizations have taken really difficult decisions about redundancies, but because of the way they've done it, even people who've left the organization, would still recommend it as a place to work. How you do this stuff is going to be of critical importance. And that does mean maintaining a sense of unity, of compassion and understanding. And it also means trying to hold on to a sense of collective identity when all those constituent parts of the organization may be separated and isolated. So, I think that those four enablers can keep guiding organizations through as we come out of the pandemic, and as I say, the more difficult stuff has to happen. Because look, the truth of the matter is that reputational risk nowadays is one of the chief challenges to organizations. And in my view, how organizations respond to the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic particularly is going to make or break reputations. I've called it, what did you do in the war, Daddy? It's a sense of, well, how did you as an organization respond? What did you do? Did you treat staff fairly? Did you also, of course, treat customers and other stakeholders fairly? But particularly for these purposes, did you treat your people fairly? And I think that, all the evidence already is that people who've behaved badly and have been shamed, I mean, organizations that have behaved badly and have been shamed, that is going to have a lasting effect. So it is in every organization's interest to try and come out of this pandemic as well as it possibly can. And at the core of that has got to be treating the most precious resource that you have, which is your people, as well as you possibly can. As I said at the beginning, I'm delighted to be able to support the work of Engage Northeast. Engage for Success, the website is a fantastic resource of free tips, case studies, and so on. I think that we're going to see a revival in interest in engagement and how people are treated as we come out of the pandemic. The Engage Northeast is fantastic, and I'm really delighted to be supporting Michelle and others. And there's a slide on the screen about how to contact them. They're also doing a study, so it would be incredibly helpful if you could go on and fill in the survey around the pandemic and how people are reacting to it, because the more evidence we have, obviously, the better we will be. I think I've done my allotted time. I'm delighted to be able to take questions. I thought that I had a slide which was for questions, but I appear to have lost it. But anyhow, is Andrew there to be able to take the Q&A?
Here I am.
I'm on time. Listen, don't look so surprised. I was under such strict instructions.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Nita. I wish we had more time, because clearly there's so much to talk about on this issue, isn't there? It's so involved,
Yeah.
and could have easily had an hour or even more and still not fitted everything in. But you did wonderfully well to give a summary of the 4 enablers, of course, and a history of your work and how it's particularly relevant in the times that we're currently going through. I wondered it might be useful to bring Michelle back in, if my colleagues can do that and if she's still there, to handle. There's just a couple of questions.
Hi, back again, thanks.
Hi, Michelle. Hi. I thought it'd be useful to, obviously, your work in the Northeast region and Nita representing all regions and the national perspective. It was just really reiterating where people can find out more about the subject of employee engagement. I know Nita mentioned the survey that you're doing. I didn't know whether you'd want to say a few more words about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just first of all, to point back to the Engage for Success website, it really is a fantastic website. There's so many resources on there. There's all the reports that Nita's talked about, sort of the legacy ones, and also some up-to-date ones as well. So fantastic resources on there. If you do nothing else, have a look on there. You can also find out the various regional contacts are all on there as well. You can find us on Twitter at Engage Northeast, and we're also on LinkedIn. So yeah, the survey, we've decided to it's kind of an ideal opportunity to have a look at how aligned the Northeast is in particular with the various elements, the 4 enablers that Nita's gone through today of engagement. So what we've done is we've popped a link in the slide. The lovely team of Alice and Laura are also going to put the link in the chat here. So in the chat there should be the link as well. Yeah. It's a confidential survey. It takes 5 minutes. Fill it out for yourselves. If you're able to, it would be amazing if you can send it out through your organisations as well. And we just want to get a view of how engaged people are across the region. We're going to compile a study and we hope to publish that in the autumn this year. So yeah, please get involved. It'd be great. Thank you. Appreciate your involvement. And thanks, Nita. That was fantastic. Really interesting. Thanks for taking part.
That's fine.
And just a quick plug for the September conference as well. We've got Nita's partner in crime, David McLeod, the other co-founder for Engage for Success. He's actually going to come up and speak to us at the September conference as well. So book your tickets.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thanks again.
So do we have any questions, Andrew?
Just a couple of compliments. Just that people had really enjoyed the presentation. There was no direct Q&A that I can see, Nita, that we haven't dealt with. I was just conscious to...
Did I bore everybody into submission? Sorry.
There was one question for me. Are you glad that you're not in number 10 anymore?
Oh God, don't get me started. I mean, I think it's quite interesting if you think about those four enablers in the political context, actually. And I have thought about this because, you know, what makes a good political machine? It's having the story. You know, what's the story? What's the strategic narrative for a party or for a government? I mean, what is it? You know, do you have engaging managers in this context means ministers? You know, do you have people who can speak human? Do you listen to the public, or have you just decided on a course of action and you stick to it? And you know, there are plenty of examples of all sorts of governments who've not, you know, who've just got ploughed ahead without, you know, kind of, as it were, listening to the electorate. And then, of course, the big one is integrity. You know, do you practice what you preach? Are you expecting from yourselves as a government and as individuals and as special advisors what you're asking everybody else to do? And that's the point where the trust thing comes in, because you know, this sense of integrity, this you know, trust is as important, well, in fact it's more important in a sense in politics. And you know, it's a really precious commodity, trust, isn't it? What is it people say? Trust enters on foot and leaves on horseback. I mean, it's true. Once you know, in any look all of this is about relationships, isn't it? I mean, if in a relationship, you know, you damage or you lose trust, it's extremely difficult. Well, it's exactly the same in politics, and it's exactly the same at work. Why? Because it's the people, stupid. You know, we're dealing with people. We're not dealing with kind of alien architectural constructs. You know, at the heart of all of this is people.
Sure. We had one more comment.
Andrew, there's a great comment in the Q&A there from one of our attendees.
Yeah, go for it, Michelle.
Alison says, great, Nita, thank you. I've used the four enablers in my last role and now in my new role to help leaders understand employee engagement and as a tool to develop our own people strategy.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Thank you. So, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Alison.
That's brilliant. Good stuff. It's nice to know that they're kind of helpful. People, just let me say this, people often ask me, you know, what's been the big change in the last 10 years? Has it, you know, has this work on engagement, and not our work, I mean, the whole engagement being kind of at the forefront, has it made a difference? And, you know, actually, I think it has, because I think if you think about it, the people like the Financial Reporting Council are asking organizations to be able to report at board level as to, you know, what's happening with their employees. So I think gradually, we're getting to the point where people are putting the two and two things together, including at board level. And investors are now increasingly interested. Show us your staff survey results, because they know that it gives you an indication of health, you know, of the organization. And again, within the National Health Service, you know, if an NHS organization is in the bottom decile of the National Staff Survey, then it's automatically a red flag. And people go in, you know, the Care Quality Commission goes in and has a look to see what's going on. So I think there's an increasing acceptance that this stuff matters. It's always, right, well, what do we do about it? And that's where hopefully at least those enablers are kind of lenses in which people can think about, you know, what they're doing.
Yeah, it definitely helps to break down such a big subject, and kind of can be a little bit daunting sometimes. Are we doing the right thing? You know, what should we be doing? So it really helps to give a bit of a structure or a framework. I know you say it's not a model, Nita, but it's definitely some key pointers. And I think the slides that you've put out today on the practical advice and tips of how to use those enablers during this time is really helpful for people.
Good.
So
I mean, it's just some thoughts, you know, everybody else, and, you know, the more, if people want to sort of, you know, get in touch and say, well, what they found worked during the pandemic, that's also incredibly valuable, because, you know, lived experience is always the thing at the end of the day. You know, case studies is pretty formally, but you know what I mean. What, you know, how we did it, what we did, I think is very valuable. And that's where getting stuff into the, you know, things like the survey that you're doing and so on would be really, really helpful.
Great.
Thanks again, both. It's been really, really enjoyable and really valuable content. Thanks, Nita, and thanks, Michelle, for joining us today. Also, looking forward to seeing your colleague, David, Nita, later on in the year.
Excellent.
Thanks,
I'll tell him
Andrew.
how lovely
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
So that was Nita Clarke from Engage for Success, and Michelle Manning representing Engage Northeast, the regional ambassador for the national campaign. Next up, we've got Paul Hitchens. He's speaking at 1:30 on employer branding. So we'll bring Paul in at 1:30. I should have mentioned there, as a follow-up to Nita's session, we've got Naomi Crozier just looking further ahead this afternoon at 2:30. We spoke a little bit there at the end about how to do this now that we've realized how important it is in terms of employee engagement. We've got some tools there, obviously, from the National Engage for Success campaign, but Naomi from Hive HR is going to spend some time looking at how to listen, respond, and adapt in terms of engaging employees. And I'm sure we'll be providing some other technologies and tools for us to benefit from as part of her session. So that's further information on employee engagement from Naomi at 2:30. But next up, 1:30, we've got